Think it gives me your same. Me spot team Europe, it's back market. You walk about the car. Me blow me a mari. Piram ay yo. Tell me look now, but me don't look if you again. No me realize him that you already left beneath.
What's going on, Reef Builders? Jake Adams here, and today I want to bring you along on a very, very different kind of adventure. Earlier in 2017, I had the opportunity to travel to Papua New Guinea to explore the coral reef and investigate the possibility of starting up some coral farming there. But while I was there, I took the opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do, and that is feed wild corals. Now, as a long-term aquarist, just because I'm on a wild coral reef, my coral reefing aquarium instincts don't go away, and I always feel the need to curate, whether it's like take algae off, flip corals back over the right side, and especially to feed them. So just because corals are photosynthetic, we take it for granted that they can get by with very, very little food, but everything on the reef has a mouth, and they still have a mouth for a reason. All different types of corals, from SPS, LPS, soft corals, they all benefit from some extra feeding, whether it's broadcast feeding or target feeding. And this is something I really wanted to bring to a wild coral reef. And I was able to set it up right for this particular trip, and it turned out to also be a really fascinating tour of some wild corals on a natural reef. So I hope you enjoy this curious little production I put together. Some of it was kind of slapped together, but I think it came out pretty good, so check it out. I am at Irupara Village, and spent a whole day diving and taking really good pictures of some awesome corals. But this video is about something really special that I've been wanting to do for a long time. It's so important to feed our corals in our home aquariums. And so one thing that I've always wanted to do is feed corals out in the wild. So that's what we're gonna do. And we're gonna set it up tonight, and then tomorrow we're gonna feed some wild corals on the natural reef just for fun. So let me crash this water. All right, quick and dirty. So the reason I killed this water is because what I'm gonna do. But yeah, Reef Roids. This is one of my favorite foods. People all around the world just love this food. And I got this food in Australia specifically to bring here to Papua New Guinea. I guess I forgot to mention that I'm in PNG because I want to feed some corals. So that's what we're gonna do. Feeding Reef Roids, one of the important things to do with Reef Roids is to soak it 10 minutes, an hour, 24 hours. At least soak it for some period of time. Don't just get it wet and put it straight in the tank, because your food won't be hydrated nearly enough, and it won't be as easy for your corals to capture. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put some Reef Roids in here, and with some seawater, this is very important, put some seawater in here, and we're gonna let it soak overnight. So let's do that. All right, so I didn't bring a funnel, but I'm gonna improvise. I got my seawater here, let me taste it. That's definitely seawater. And I'm gonna make a makeshift funnel, because this is how we do it native style. So I don't really have any good guidelines for you on how much to feed your tank. Just use a little bit of common sense. Don't feed too much. But I'm gonna go the opposite direction, because we're gonna feed the whole reef. So I'm gonna put this whole jar in here. Darren, can you give me a hand? That's nice. Yeah. Alrighty, so we have Reef Roids totally saturating this this bottle of seawater, and you're gonna shake it up gently. Not really shake it up, but just stir it up. Just make sure it's fully hydrated, fully mixed. All right, it's pretty good. So one thing that was cool is, as I was leaving Cairns Marine, where I bought this Reef Roid, someone asked me, how are you gonna feed it? And I hadn't really thought that far along, and someone suggested Julian's thing, So I cannot think of a better device with which to feed Reef Roids to wild ocean corals. And I think that'll be evident when we use it out in the wild. So here we go. We got our Reef Roids mixed up. Gonna put it in a cooler. You don't want to mix it up and leave it out. You want to mix it up and refrigerate it. So we're gonna put it in the cooler, which is right underneath that camera, and we'll come back at it tomorrow. The coral trout right next to our Reef Roid. Actually, no, I'm gonna give it a little bit more of a shake up. Yeah, there we go. Oh man, there's gonna be some happy corals tomorrow. Very cool. So check out this beauty of island living engineering. I've hooked up the Julian Sting right to my dive light, which is on an articulating arm. That way the light's going to be right on where I'm feeding. We got the wide angle lens. And if you'll turn it this way a little bit, James, other way. Yeah, turn it this way. Some more, more. That way we can see the syringe there on the side. And I'll be able to hold the camera and use the plunger at the same time. Very cool, very fun. Could use a couple more zip ties, but that's gonna do the job. Very nice.
Tropics. Meet me halfway across the world. Wake up to see the sunshine. Sleeping on sand by the sea. Let's get lost in paradise. Is this what you mean? Is this what you really need? When you say, let's get lost in paradise. Let's get lost in paradise.
So I did some test feedings in the shallow water, but then I wanted to go straight back to go see a beautiful orange Leptocerus coral that I encountered at 105 feet on some previous dives. This is really cool to see this coral where it occurs in the natural environment, because it was really dim and you can see how its color changes when I apply the spotlight. But down here, it's actually a lot easier to feed. There's a lot less flow, and makes it a lot easier for the particles to settle on top of the corals. And that way these corals, like this Leptocerus, that have very few tentacles, can get a chance to hold on to them. So while I'm down here, I really wanted to take an opportunity to feed as wide a variety of corals as possible. Here you see me feeding a non-photosynthetic Gorgonian, mesophotic Leptocerus. You can see how pale this guy is. It probably doesn't have much zooxanthellae. And you know, even down at 100 feet, there's still some deep water style acros. And you can see at this depth they're really thin branched, and they grow in a plating form to try to catch as much light as possible. But one of the things I want you to take away from feeding these corals in the wild is at depth, there's a lot less water flow. It makes it a lot easier to target feed corals that really appreciate it. So when you're feeding corals in your tank, you know, sometimes broadcast feeding is the way to go, but I'm personally like a real big fan of target feeding, you know, to ensure that as many polyps as possible get as much food as possible, and they don't have to work to hold on to the food particles quite so much. Another reason to make this video, bringing you along while I feed corals on the wild reef, is we get to see some common aquarium corals that are actually quite rare on the reef. So this is a branching Blastomussa merletti, so branching blasto, and this is one of only a handful of times I've actually seen this coral in the wild. And you can see it doesn't look quite as healthy and perfect as it does in aquariums, because it has to fight to live on the reef, and it's competing with coralline algae and everything else on the reef. Here's another example of a common aquarium coral that is less commonly encountered on wild coral reefs. This is a candy coral, Calistrea, and usually I see this coral in shallow water, but at this depth, this coral is really able to produce a really impressive stand of that one particular coral. Very cool to see this one in the wild. So Papua New Guinea really surprised me with this abundance of clove polyps. These guys are a little bit greenish, but I did see some brown and some bright green. And to be honest, I'm not sure if these kinds of corals can actually take in this kind of food particles, but since the flow was mild, I decided to target feed them anyway. Another oddball that we generally only see as small frags is this branching Cyphastera decadia. Now, it was really cool to see sprawling colonies of this particular coral because you just never see corals of this species get quite as big in aquariums. It's not just the corals on the reef that rely on filter feeding, like this feather star that actually is absolutely not photosynthetic. Those branchy arms are used to capture food in the water column, and it was so satisfying to feed it. I decided to give it 2 blasts of food and make sure it got a nice helping. Right next to it, you can see a definitely non-photosynthetic gorgonian that is surely appreciating this nice little injection of food. One group of coral that absolutely has to feed are these carnation corals of the genus Dendronephthia. Now, there's been virtually no success with this coral in captivity, and I don't think they need anything special to eat. I just think they need to eat a lot. And in our closed systems, in our home aquariums, it's really hard to provide them with as much food as they need. So it was really satisfying to just go ahead and give them a feast of Reef Roids here on the reef. And at this depth, it is actually probably about 60 feet. You can see that the water flow is actually picking back up from where it was down shallow. So they're going to give it another blast. And this is somewhat target feeding and a little bit more also broadcast feeding because I try to be upstream when I apply the food. So giant clams are actually photosynthetic machines, and unlike corals, they actively filter feed the water, but they're really not searching for the larger particles of zooplankton that we tend to feed our corals. These guys prefer the smaller particles of phytoplankton. So not going to target feed this guy, but we're just going to enjoy this nice, large, blue-spotted Tridacna squamosa clam in its natural environment. So feeding animals on a wild coral reefs is something that I've had in my head for a really long time, and I'm really pleased of how it came together. It was a little bit bootstrapped, but I think it turned out pretty well, and I hope that the aquarium viewers will take home some of the important points that if your reef animal has a mouth, it needs to feed. Corals can survive on just light alone, but they're really going to thrive through some dedicated feeding. So at this point, I really want to thank the National Fisheries Authority of Papua New Guinea for bringing me out to participate in these coral reef surveys. And I also want to thank Polyp Lab for supporting this video and helping me to teach you guys the importance of feeding corals and giving you a really neat tour of some wild corals on a natural coral reef. So you know the drill. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button. If you have any questions, this is a great video for asking questions about feeding your corals. I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback from the community. So yeah, go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. This is a really cool way to kick off the new year. So I want to thank everybody who supported the channel in the last 12 months and look forward to seeing you guys again on the next video.
I'm just trying to creep like mine. I don't smoke up, but tonight you can be my vice. And I need advice. Should we sit beside the fire till it isn't bright? Should we sit up on the sand, watch the stars till we see the morning light? Or we could just talk all night if you like. Meet me halfway across the world. Wake up to see the sunshine.